Hello everyone. So in this video, I will just go over the template that you will be using for your article presentation when you're presenting the article that you selected in your EBP1 assignment that was approved by me. So the presentation length will be about 7 to 10 minutes. I would definitely ask you to keep the presentation under 10 minutes. On the first slide, so the title slide, you will just put down the article, so the name of the article that you are presenting on, and then your own name. Um, so the first slide of the presentation will deal with the problem statement. So just in a couple of brief sentences, talk about what the study is. So introduce the study, what the authors are trying to do in the study, what the study is about, and then discuss why it is an important study or a problem that the audience or the reader should care about. So the address the so what of the section. So when you're talking about this, I really just want you to read this first section of the article and then think about whether the authors make a very clear argument or a clear case about the importance of the study and about the problem that they are addressing in the study. So for example, if it's an intervention, then are they talking about what problem this intervention is going to address and why this is an important intervention? So do the authors really make a clear case right at the beginning of the study for why this study exists? And if the very first section of the paper gives you an idea of what this study is about and what is going to come in the next few sections. And then kind of just identify if the authors have explicitly stated their research question that the study is trying to answer, and whether if it is a quantitative study, then is there a research hypothesis, and what are the research hypotheses? So have the authors explicitly identified a research question and research hypothesis? If so, what it is? So when you're writing your most of your slides, the content of the slides itself would be just short bullets. You don't need to put a lot of text. You don't need to provide citations. Just a few bullets, and then in your presentation itself, you will be summarizing and talking about your assessment or your analysis of these individual sections. So in this case, your analysis of the problem statement. Um, Moving on to the literature review and the theory. So just sort of briefly summarize again what was the literature that was reviewed by the authors, and what does the existing literature say about this topic? So what is the current evidence that exists on this program or this policy or this intervention, and what are some of what is your analysis or assessment of the existing literature? So have in the past have the literature has the literature identified the different independent variables that might be associated or that might affect the DV or affect the outcome of a particular intervention policy? What were some of the independent variables, or what were some of the factors that were found to be significant in past research? And what does the existing literature really say? So is there a lot of literature on this topic, or is there very little literature on the topic, in which if this is an exploratory study, there may not be a lot of literature on the study? So just again, a brief summary of what the literature reviewed by the authors found and what it says about the current topic. And then also talk about if the authors have identified a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework for this study, then then just identify what that is. So have they identified a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework that sort of guides their work? So is there an overarching theory that they're basing their study on? So for example, it may be psychodynamic theory, or some it may be the ecological model. So is there any major theoretical or conceptual framework that has been used by the study? And then what is it? So moving on to the methods section, the quantitative, in terms of the quantitative methods. So if you have a quantitative paper, then this slide is relevant to you. If you have a qualitative paper, then just wait till I get to the next slide. So for quantitative studies, identify what the study purpose is. Most of you are using evaluative studies because that was one of the criteria for your article selection. And then just if it's exploratory, mention that. What is the study design? So is the study testing a particular intervention? So in that case, is it experimental, pre-experimental, quasi-experimental, or is it just correlation? So what is the study? Is the study trying to establish causation, or is it just trying to look at correlation or associations and differences? So do the authors explain or justify their design choice? So do they talk about, so for instance, if they've used a quasi-experimental design or a pre-experimental design, then did they explain why they why they chose that particular design and not an experimental design, for instance? Or if it's a cross-sectional study, which means that they have only collected data at one time point, did they talk about that? Like, what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of that design choice? And then what is the sampling strategy for the study, as well as what's the sample size? And what theoretical population is the study generalizing to? Now, the authors, in most cases, it's unlikely that the authors would have identified what theoretical population the study is generalizing to. So what is your idea of what the theoretical population is that they are generalizing to based on the sampling strategy that they used? And then also look at the discussion section of the paper. Are they talking about the generalizability of the findings in any way? Are they talking about what populations or what groups this study could apply to, or have they talked about the study having limited generalizability, and in that case, what are the limitations to the generalizability? And that would sort of help you narrow down on what the theoretical population is. In case of experimental design, just identify if there was random assignment or not. So any kind of experimental designs, really just identify that. Of course, if it's experimental, then there will be random assignment. If it's one of the others, so pre-experimental, quasi-experimental, there may or may not be random assignments, so just identify that. And then did the authors explain or justify their sampling choice? So did they explain why they chose the particular sampling strategy that they used? Did they explicitly discuss that that methodological choice? And then talk about what are the measures that were used for data collection. So again, here you will just talk about what if there were any scales or if there were any measures, or was it just a set of questions that were used? If it was a measure or a scale that they used, then what information did they provide about the reliability and validity of the measure? And what can you find? What information can you find about the reliability and validity of the measure? Just do a quick search and see whether you can find this measure having been used in any other studies. Can you find any a little blurb in any one of those studies? Again, you'll find that in the method section under measures. So can you find anything about the reliability and validity of the measure? Don't spend too much time of it. It should just probably take like 5 to 10 minutes of your time at the most, where you are just typing in the name of the measure as your keyword, seeing what you get, what information you get. And then just kind of, did the authors talk about what the internal consistency statistic is? And then in the internal consistency statistic would be an indicator of the reliability. And did they talk about whether the study has good validity or not? And did they provide and sometimes the authors will just provide a citation to another study that examines specifically the reliability and validity of a measure. And that's fine. So just mention that. And then how was the data collected? So was it mailed-in surveys? Was it an online survey? Did the participants, did the respondents get interviewed, or did they just self-report? So how was the data collected? How was the study administered? And then what analysis was used by the authors and why? Again, here I don't expect you to really analyze you really discuss whether this analysis was appropriate or not. Just talk about what the analysis was that they used, and did they explain why they used the analysis strategy that they used. So again, for each of these, you would just probably have small bullets up here. And then in your presentation, you will be presenting more of your assessment or your analysis of the methods section. So the main thing to consider here is, did the authors really explain each of the methodological choices that they made? Did they explicitly identify what those were? And then did they explain why they made the choices that they made, so that there is transparency? So as the reader, you know what to expect from these methods, right? So when you're critiquing the article, you would know what the strengths and the weaknesses are of a study like this if they've done a good job of identifying what their study methods are. So now if your paper is qualitative, then the methods section of your paper, you're going to identify what the study purpose is. So again, most of you have an evaluative study because that was the criteria for your paper. And then if it's exploratory as well, then mention that. And then what was the study design that was used? So what type of qualitative study was this? So was it an ethnographic study? Did the study use a grounded theory approach? Did they use a phenomenological approach? Did they use narrative analysis? So what was the type of study? And this would be, is this explicitly identified by the author? And then what was the sampling strategy and sample size for the study? And did the authors explain or justify why they chose that type of sampling, or why they chose the type of sample size? So for instance, if they used purposive sampling or convenient sampling, then did they explain why they used purposive and convenient sampling, and what were some of the strengths and weaknesses of that? So remember that in a qualitative study, the aim of the study is never really generalizability. Rather, you're really trying to understand a phenomenon in depth. So as a result of which, for qualitative studies, you're not really going to find random sampling or stratified random sampling, really, because the idea of the study is not, you're not trying to go for representativeness. Rather, but having said that, all of the different sampling choices have certain pros and cons. So for instance, if they're using maximum variation sampling, then they should explain why they're using maximum variation sampling, or why they're using purposive sampling. So when they are purposefully selecting participants, what are they basing that purposeful selection on? So did the authors explain this sampling strategy? And then what was the data collection tool that was used by the study? So did they use a semi-structured interview guide? If they conducted a focus group discussion, then what guide was used for that? And then did the authors provide a copy of the data collection tool? So sometimes you will see that as an appendix or as a table or a figure in the study. Or the authors may simply say that there was a semi-structured interview guide, and these are some of the sample questions that were on the guide. So just, again, you will just for each of these questions, you're just writing down in your presentation itself, you're just writing down on the slides itself, you're just putting down bullets to address each of these. And then you are talking about this about like your assessment of the methods in your presentation. And then how was the data collected? What were the procedures used during data collection? And then briefly describe what procedures the authors identified. How was the data collected? So is it interview? Is it a focus group discussion? Was it questions on an open-ended survey, or open-ended questions on a survey, which is not ideal, but that's sometimes like there are studies like that. And then what were the procedures that were used during the data collection? There would be a section in most qualitative papers, there would be a section identifying what these procedures are. And then just how was the data analyzed and why? So again, according to the authors, how did they go about analyzing their data? So what were some of their coding strategies? Did they have peer coding? So that is, a number of people coded the data independently and then reviewed the coding together. And then how did they analyze the data? So are they using thematic analysis, or are they using any other form of content analysis? So what kind of data analysis strategy are they using? And then have the authors explained why. So some of you may have a mixed method study, which is the study has a quantitative component and a qualitative component. In that case, you would have, I would recommend having two separate slides, one for the quantitative section and then one for the qualitative section. You are addressing each of the relevant questions here for your quantitative section. So whatever part is relevant, whatever part they addressed, and then you are doing the same for the qualitative study. So for instance, they may just had the same sampling strategy throughout, or they might have used a broader sample for their quantitative data and then decided to pick out certain students or certain people from the larger pool to do a focus group discussion or to do in-depth interviews for their qualitative part. So if you're doing a mixed method study, so I would recommend just having two slides, on the one that summarizes quickly what the quantitative methods are, and then one that talks a little bit about the qualitative methods. And then in terms of the results, again, if you have a quantitative study or if you have a mixed method study, then have a slide about the quantitative results of the study. So sometimes the results section will be divided on each research hypothesis. So in that case, just what was each study hypothesis? How was the study? How was each of these hypotheses? Were each of these hypotheses rejected or accepted? And then what were the IVs and the DVs for each hypothesis? Were there socio-demographic factors that were included in the models as independent variables? And then what were some of the main findings of the study? And here I really just want you to give your analysis or your assessment. So focus on what you understood from the results section about what you think are the main findings. So look at the tables that they have, look at the explanation that they have, look at some of the p-values, look at some of the statistics that they have provided, and then look at how they have interpreted the results, and then really sort of summarize in your own words what were the main findings of the study. So if it's an intervention, did they find that the intervention worked or not? And what are some of the components of that? And here I really also want you to kind of focus on what was challenging or difficult for you when you were reviewing the findings section of the paper. I don't expect you to understand every single nuance of the analysis of the results section of the paper. For a lot of you, you have picked articles that have complicated analyses. and that's perfectly fine. But I just kind of want you to identify what were the most challenging or difficult elements for you when you were reviewing the findings section of the paper. What did you have difficulty um, understanding, and then did the discussion section sort of clarify the results for you? Did the authors do a good job of explaining what the results section of the paper was in their discussion and really talking about what that means for social work practitioners? This is getting to be a pretty long video. Anyway, I'm trying to be as detailed as possible because you're also doing your final critique on the same paper. So in terms of your results, how did the authors present the findings of the study? What were some of the main findings of the study? So how did they break it up as themes and sub-themes? How did they present the findings of the study? And then what, again, just read the study, read the results section, and identify what were some of the key findings of the study. Here again, you're providing your own understanding of what the main findings were. Did the authors use direct quotes from the participants to substantiate their findings and arguments? Did they really use a lot of quotes to supported what their analysis was? And then what was challenging and difficult for you when you were reviewing the findings section of the paper? Did you have trouble understanding how the authors got to some of the findings? Or how did they come about some of the findings? Was some of the findings difficult for you to understand? Just kind of talk about the challenges or difficulties that you may have had in the results when interpreting the results of the study, and then was that clarified in the discussion section of your paper? So again, if you have a mixed methods study, you are focusing on both slides. Of course, the level of detail on each slide for you will be lesser because because you may not have a huge quantitative section or a huge qualitative section. There might be, your quantitative section might just be descriptives, and then your qualitative section might be in depth. But if you have any questions, if you have a mixed method study, and if you have any questions about about your specific presentation, then please feel free to reach out to me. And then in the discussion section, I just kind of want you to focus on whether the existing literature that the authors identified were corroborated by the study, or did the study find something new or something different? So and then I just kind of want you to focus on three of your main takeaways from reading the discussion section, and think about it in terms of a practitioner, a social work practitioner, or somebody who's interested in this topic. You have picked this research study because obviously you have some level of interest in this topic. So as somebody who's interested in the topic, as somebody who might practice in this area, what were three of your main takeaways from reading that discussion section? How did this contribute to your knowledge about the article? And then, did the authors discuss what the implications of the study were for practice, for policy, and for research? And then you can just name a couple of those implications. Again, I don't want very lengthy or wordy slides, just a few bullet points. And then in your presentation itself, so in your oral presentation itself, you will be talking a little bit more about your assessments of each of these. Again, the whole presentation is only 10 minutes, so brevity is key here. So identify what are the most important things that you want to talk about for each of these, and then focus on that. And then for your strengths section of the article, so this is your critique of the article. What, according to you, were some of the strengths in the design and in the findings? So I don't want you to really evaluate the whole article for strengths and weaknesses, but just focus on the design. So was it, if it's cross-sectional, if it's pre-experimental, if it's experimental, in case of quantitative studies? So, and then in case of qualitative studies, is it grounded theory? Is it content analysis? Is it case study? Is it phenomenologically Is it a phenomenological study? And then just kind of what are some of the strengths of the design that the author selected, and are some of the strengths of the study in terms of the findings. So I, again, like I said, I just want to know what your assessment of this is. And the same exact thing for weaknesses as well. So what, according to you, were the weaknesses in the study design and in the findings itself? And then finally, just to note that your final article critique would be due on the May 7th. You're doing your article critique on the same you're doing your article critique on the same article that you've selected, you're doing this presentation on. I will be providing you feedback on your presentation that you can then incorporate into your final worksheet or your final critique. So if you have any questions about while you're working on this, look at the worksheet that's already uploaded under your assignments. And if you have any questions specific to your article about your article critique, then send that to me when you send your presentation to me. And I will provide feedback or try and answer all your questions that you can then incorporate into your article critique. So the idea is to really sort of build each assignment should build on the previous one, so you can really sort of in-depth analyze an article, and you can do this more in depth, and then these will be transferable skills that you can then use when you're looking at any research paper. Thank you for watching this presentation. This was a lot longer than I expected, but hopefully I have answered all your questions for each of your sections. So as you can see, you will probably have a total of, let's see, your title slide, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 slides, really. And then if you have mixed methods, then you may have a couple of extra slides for methods and your analysis. Let me know if you have any questions. Please feel free to email me. That is always the fastest way to reach me. Thank you for watching this video, and have a great week. Thank you.